The more evidence, the better, I say.
I mean, this is so improbable.
That's a bold statement.
I mean, I think that's a fair point, but I didn't make that argument. He did.
Why is that true? Is that a good question? Maybe it's not.
That's true. You're not supposed to ask good questions like
sorry,
that.
sorry.
Don't ask difficult questions.
Bill, jump in here.
I'm Bill the Christian.
And I'm Drew the Skeptic.
You're listening to The Divide.
Well, welcome to The Divide. We have with us today Justin, who's the Public Relations Manager at Atheists for Liberty. Welcome to the Divide podcast, Justin.
Thank you for having me on.
So you are called Atheists for Liberty, and I think you're a fairly new group. So what do you mean Atheists for Liberty? Aren't all atheists for liberty? Explain that to us.
Yes, we are a new group. We've been around for just over a year. We debuted at CPAC about a year ago, and we were just at CPAC 2021. So we are people who we say are right of woke. We care about free speech, freedom of thought, freedom for all. We are a coalition of people who are identifying as libertarians, classical liberals, conservatives, something very different than, oh, there was a bit of static there. Something very different, I think, than most atheist groups who we perceive as having progressive or left-leaning politics. We're offering something different to the scene, and we're also combating wokeness.
So you're not just all on the left, which I guess you're saying is more common for the atheist groups. That's kind of been our experience, I think, too. But you're saying you're trying to be truly diverse in the political spectrum. Is that right?
Right. We think that we're one of the only atheist organizations, actually, that have people who are primarily right of woke.
So free speech, we just started there. I take it that's something that would be considered high virtue.
Exactly. And we think it is very much under threat of people who are right. Or we think it is very much under threat from people on the left. We see stories and stories day after day where people are fired from jobs for having particular opinions that have nothing to do with their work. We see people afraid to speak up about their political opinions, and there might be some extreme consequences if they do. College professors, I've been seeing under a great deal of threat. Just the other day, there was one who disagreed with white fragility in a diversity training, and they had embarked on some investigation against this professor and eventually lost their job. So it's some real consequences here that if you don't subscribe to the woke narrative of things, if you don't subscribe to far left politics, that you are under threat from many, many, many spheres of society.
So when you talk about, I think you said one of the purposes is to combat wokeness. Is that what you're talking about? Sort of protecting people from whether it's, hurting their careers because they've said something unwoke, or what forms of sort of combating that do you do?
Well, we like to respond to a lot of the arguments that are out there. People might say that, oh, well, America is this patriarchy, it's a racist society, police departments are racist. You get all these claims that are leveled that, oh, well, there's such thing as white privilege, and that people have some inherent benefits in society or disadvantages because of the nature of their birth or class or whatever you have. And we say, okay, well, there might be some advantages, there might be some disadvantages here and there, but that's not a complete part of the story. We have to consider some other factors, but we think the woke factor likes to really simplify things. We hear from feminists in particular about the gender wage gap, and that, oh, women make 7/10 what men make in jobs. And I think it's very misleading statistics the way they put that out, when they're not considering for other factors, such that men work more dangerous jobs that happen to pay more, men happen to work more hours, women make different choices, such as having children, so they're not in the workplace as often, and they have other priorities. Women also tend to lean toward lesser paying jobs compared to men. So there are all kinds of differences for the factors, but we see this, oh, well, there's some certain phenomena in society, there's a disparity, so it must be because of misogyny, it must be because of racism, it must be because of these oppressive social factors that they consider.
It can't be entirely popular to push back against that narrative. It seems like a very powerful wave in society today. Is that, how are you trying to do that? And I guess what what ways, what forums, and what kind of backlash have you seen?
Well, yes, we are attending a lot of conferences. It's difficult in this pandemic time as there aren't as many events, there aren't as many meetings. We're not having a lot of in-person gatherings for sure. So Atheists for Liberty in the past year, we've gone to a handful of events and conferences, providing outreach to people saying, hey, we're here, we are right of woke, and we are providing a community for atheists. And we've had many people, even at events like Turning Point, USA's Student Action Summit, CPAC, I mentioned, come up to us and say, hey, I'm an atheist, I'm non-religious, I support you guys. Even some religious individuals who say, hey, well, I don't agree with you on the God issue, but we can agree with you on many, many other things. So we have a broad coalition of people.
One of the things that Bill and I have talked about a lot, and I guess one of the points of our podcast really is that it seems like people in general, you know, the divide, whatever the divide is, in this case, woke, non-woke, you know, Christian atheist, religious atheist, whatever the divide tends to be, you know, it's easy to caricature the other side and to sort of vilify the other side. And I feel like more than anything with, you know, when people go on the attack on social media, it's kind of a shoot first, ask questions later kind of thing. It's like, this is what I'm
Oh,
going to
yeah.
assume you meant, and you are guilty of this until
Oh,
proven
absolutely.
innocent. But I do believe there are like good people on both sides, and so would you, if you were to reshape, if you were to be president of the woke side for a day, um, there are redeemable things there, right? It's just what do you think causes it to be such a free for all? Is it the
Yeah,
internet?
I think it's a lot of history, really. It goes back to somewhere around 2008, 2009 in atheist communities when people were speaking up and saying, oh, women are being excluded from the movement. And that turned out to be women are under threat within the movement. And if you don't have more women at your events, then you're sexist. And these conferences are actually dangerous. So at the same time, there were some women who were saying, hey, women are being excluded. But then the same women were saying that the atheist communities were dangerous, that there are these dangerous male speakers and women are going to get assaulted at conferences. And there's all this illicit activity that goes on and people aren't giving consent and people are being taken advantage of, using that in loose terms there. And I just don't think that was right at all. There was one prominent speaker, Paula Kirby, who around 2019 wrote a letter called Sisterhood of the Oppressed that was talking about these divisions and responding to the claims that, well, no, it's not that women are being excluded from the movement. Everyone is welcome. You can go to events, you can go to conferences, you can opt to be a speaker, but maybe many women aren't volunteering to be speaker and they aren't out in the front as much as men are. And she said she's been in many organizations, she's hosted conferences, and it just seems that men gravitate more toward the stage. But this isn't a sexist thing. This isn't a patriarchal thing. There are reasons and explanations for this. And with women being under threat, she noted that these conferences can have the sexualized atmosphere that, look, you're away from home, hotel rooms are here, you have alcohol, you're going to these events after, you have a common interest, and in almost every hobby, this can be the case. And if you don't want to be involved with the parties, if you don't want to be involved with the activities afterwards, then just simply remove yourself from the occasion. Or if you want to partake, do so responsibly. But the way that it was displayed, or the way that it was argued by feminists at the time, was that the atheist community was exclusionary and dangerous to women was completely false.
I
And the
hear.
atheist, sorry,
Sorry.
I was just going to say, and the atheist community in general, like that's a very broad brush to paint something with, I would say, especially since we're talking about um, you know, a specific group of atheists that you don't, as an atheist, agree with. So sorry, Bill, go ahead.
I was going to say that I hear sort of the voice of Jordan Peterson in a sense echoing in my head, that you're saying a lot of things you would hear from Jordan Peterson. I think is that fair to say?
I'm generally a fan of him. I think he sometimes gets it wrong on the God issue, but we do have a lot in common in other ways. And this is I sent to you before the show. It was an article by one of our advisors, the Atheists for Liberty, Dr. Peter Boghossian, who talked about the great realignment, that it was a time where the God debate was the main issue, but now a lot of atheists, at least at Atheists for Liberty and people who support us, are arguing these social and cultural issues, that the lines have changed over time, and we've actually found a lot of agreement with conservatives and a lot of religious people as well. It was even Ben Shapiro about a week ago on his show was talking about what he called was racism of the gaps, that if you can't explain something, then it must be racism. And it's like, here's my Ben Shapiro question. Okay, guys, listen, atheists talk about God, and if you can't explain something in society, well, then God must have did it. It's like God of the gaps. But atheists say, no, just because you can't explain it doesn't mean it was God. But he's talking about
That's a fairly good Ben Shapiro.
Oh, thank you. He's a faster talker than I, for sure. But just because we can't explain something doesn't mean it's sexism, doesn't mean it's racism, doesn't mean it's misogyny. It's just simply not the case. But we've heard these arguments from atheists in the last decade or so, going on and on and on, to the point where many of these organizations, I think, have really shifted their priorities too, where, okay, let's talk about the religious argument. Let's talk about church-state separation. Let's normalize atheism. Let's have these debates and discussions. But we don't see that very much. Now it's about, okay, we're just going to put out these political talking points from the left. Now we're going to talk about all these things that really don't have much to do with the original mission. And that's where Atheists for Liberty comes in. We want to pick up where the movement left off and give an alternative message.
I hear, I don't think this will surprise you that a lot of Christians have taken to Jordan Peterson's arguments as well. Not, of course, everything he says, but I mean, he's not. I don't think he even identifies really as a Christian, but rather that he's saying some things that are true that Christians also believe or happen to believe, if you want to say it that way. But I think I think within Christianity itself, there's a massive divide over how the churches are responding to what I guess is wokeism. And so are you finding, you said you found some people who are religious that also are sort of being allies to what you're trying to do. Is that correct?
That's right. And one particular individual, Michael O'Fallon, he is the head of Sovereign Nations. He hosts many conferences. He's a Christian. He works with James Lindsay, who's one of our advisors. James Lindsay runs New Discourses, the website and podcast. He recently authored the book Cynical Theories, talking about wokeism, its origins, and how it's manifesting in today's society. So we're finding allyship in many ways with Christians. And about 10 years ago, I never would have thought that this was the case. Oh, I'd be one watching Tucker Carlson, and I'd be going to CPAC and attending and finding so much in common with these people. But over time, yes, I found more in common for sure.
I was going to ask if there was any, if you had any opportunities with olive branches extended to or from the other side of the woke thing. It's funny, we talked to someone else about the term woke, and is that itself a pejorative, or is that do people self-identify as woke? But I don't know what else to call it. So, but I have looked up certain things, and if you read the definitions or the Wikipedia page on intersectionality or whatever the quote unquote woke term might be, it's like, okay, I can see how there was a thread here that it got started, and if you just read the definition, it's like it's not really as controversial as when you read all the things into it, like identity sort of controls is the support for everything, and if you don't have a certain identity, then you can't even be taught, and I think about, well, that kind of puts a stop on discourse, and that makes things really difficult. I guess what I'm asking is, have you approached this from hey, you've got some great ideas, maybe let's figure out a way to come together on it, instead of weaponize it?
Yeah, unfortunately, that almost is never the case. It was about a decade ago where there were these divisions in the atheist communities. And I, with some others, said, hey, let's come together. Let's talk. Let's have this kind of ceasefire. Let's, stop attacking each other. And hey, instead of writing these hit pieces every day, and there's an allegation made, so we're just going to throw this person under the bus without actually reaching out to them and asking questions. Well, that didn't work. And even Richard Dawkins, I believe at the time, co-authored a piece with other secular community leaders or personalities and saying, hey, before you start attacking people, maybe consider picking up the phone. But it was one feminist blogger who said, you're telling me to talk to my harassers on the phone. And that was the going to lengths about things a while back, that if you disagree, it's harassment, it's cyber stalking, it's all these terms they throw at you. You're an abuser, you're stalking the person in person and online. So they wouldn't even have that they can't understand that a disagreement exists, that someone else can have a different perspective on things and you could still have a conversation. But no, if there's disagreement, then that person must be a sexual assault apologist. You know, I'm trying to avoid some trigger words here that might get you demonetized in some ways.
Maybe
so
you could. Sorry.
You get this vilification that goes on and on. So we wonder, like, is it really worth even reaching out to them again and again to have these conversations when they didn't even want to have them in the first place? And would they even happen in good faith? For instance, there was one podcast that mentions Atheists for Liberty, and it was this like diatribe for about 10 minutes, and we're for like colonialism and slavery and, you know, a certain power that's the opposite of black. And it's like, really, like, do I really want to have a conversation with a person who's just going to be so uncharitable? I really don't. But I have had some online conversations with people on Twitter. One person who issued a hit piece about Atheists for Liberty, again, like not asking us before we went. Like there were just some misconceptions about CPAC, that we were going to venerate Trump and that we were all in front of the Trump statue and that's what the event was about. It's like, no, we weren't about that at all. Just some real mischaracterizations that they could have just asked some basic questions, but they didn't do that.
In some ways, you're sort of explaining why Trump's coalition, so to speak, was so diverse, I think, because people get lumped into sort of one bucket if you're not in agreement. But the wokeism itself, do you mind giving just like 2 or 3 bullet points of sort of how you would understand that? What does that mean?
Yeah, it's an idea that society is structured in such a way to disadvantage particular individuals, that women are under attack, that trans rights are under attack, that the cops are racist, society's racist, that everything that's really brought us to this day has this corrupt nature to it, that you need to wake up to this and join the resistance, join the movement against this, that, oh, we need to disband the police, we need to defund the police, we need to do all of these really radical things. And it really wasn't the Declaration of Independence that was an honest document, because the founders owned slaves or had ties to that. So, you know, really wasn't freedom, and it's never really happened. And we're just working toward that today to try to restore the society to what it could be, what it should be. And it's this radical tearing up of the past in many ways, that we need to disband certain statues and flags, and football teams shouldn't have certain names. And it just goes everywhere. It goes into corporations, it goes into places of employment, it goes into schools. It's really in every sphere of society. Even one of my favorite hobbies, Dungeons and Dragons, was under attack. That certain source material from years ago depicted people who lived in the jungle and were savage, and that's analogous to racism today and post-colonial attitudes. And certain races in the game, oh well, they have some negative ability scores, we need to do away with that. Oh, some races like orcs might be more evil than other races. Oh no, that's racism. So it's really going into every sphere of society and just attacking everything. Magic the Gathering under fire as well. Some of the nerdy hobbies of the world, and nothing can be okay. Everything has to be revamped. Everything has to be changed, because the people in power have this agenda to put others down.
So have you oh, go ahead, Drew. Yes, next question.
Yeah, I want to do some considerable clarification there, and maybe even a little pushback. I think I like where you got to at the end, where it's like the problem with this. So maybe we could agree that that not all of the ideas that you just outlined are inherently bad, but it's what you got to at the end that's bad. It's the way those ideas are being reacted to by many of the people that hold them. In other words, I feel like, yeah, there probably are some systemically unfair things in our society that persist to this day. There certainly have been in the past, but what do we do about that? Do we just defund the police, or do we, and even in those sort of radical ideas that people have, are there ways that we can work on real problems? So I'll let you respond to that before I go on. I mean,
Yeah, there are indeed some problems in society, but putting them at such a scope of like the gender wage gap, as I mentioned, or defunding the police, these are really radical approaches. These are really different visions of it. And personally, I lean more libertarian. And if you want to talk about things like prison reform, decriminalization, legalization of drugs, decriminalization of sex work, I'm for these things personally. And there are these problems, but yes, what are the solutions? How are we going to amend these problems? And in some cases, it's not government stepping in that's going to help. Sometimes it can hurt more than it can help. So just allowing, here goes back to the liberty, more personal freedom, more choices that people can make in their lives to live the kind of life they want without substantial interference from the government.
Do you mind if I ask then very quickly, just for a very quick response on sort of your take on the cake baker thing? I mean, are you sort of comfortable with the sort of the law essentially coercing him to sort of bake this cake for a gay wedding, or how would you sort of view that? Just very quickly.
Oh, I haven't really looked into that so deeply.
Okay.
I really haven't.
That's fair enough answer.
But I know that private businesses, like for instance, I play a lot of poker and go into casinos, and a lot of poker rooms and casinos have rights to not allow people on property if they deem them as disruptive, or if they found out that they were cheating or something. And in some cases, I can understand that you're a private business, and well, you would give good grounds for excluding a patron, that you can make those kind of decisions that, well, yeah, you could let everyone in the door to begin with, but at a certain point, you can just ask the person to leave. Even it's commonly understood that people who have an advantage in blackjack are asked to leave the casino, even though they're doing nothing illegal. They're using their heads, they're doing math, they're just outsmarting the casino. And unfortunately, these people often get backed off from casinos. Like, sir, we don't want your business. And, there's not any like legal thing of like, okay, we're going to take you to jail or you're cheating or anything like that. It's just not happening. But the casinos are deciding, okay, well, hey, we have this business and we don't want certain types of customers, so we're not going to provide a certain service to you anymore. And for that, as a private business, I can understand why private businesses would want to exclude certain customers.
Let me give you sort of how I think some Christians will think about this kind of a problem, wokeism, or the worst part, say, of wokeism. That they'll say, well, Nietzsche long ago, Friedrich Nietzsche, writing around 1900, warned everybody that if God is dead, that this is sort of the famous parable of the madman, right? Where the madman himself is an atheist, trying to persuade other atheists that they have taken too lightly the death of God, that they don't realize what's coming when society wakes up and realizes God doesn't exist. There's just going to be chaos in terms of the sort of moral, intellectual framework of society will collapse, and people need to start thinking a little bit about what that will mean. So I think some Christians will think, well, some of this is just sort of an echo effect of a world that no longer believes in God, or because it's largely on the secular side that you see this. But how would you respond to that?
Yeah, Ayan Hirsi Ali actually was on Ben Shapiro's show, and Ben Shapiro had posed a similar question of, do you think this is because of lack of belief? And her response, I would agree with that. With or without God, you're still going to have this kind of stuff. Personally, I draw a lot of inspiration from Stoic philosophy, and the author Seneca had a chapter called The Degeneracy of the Age. And there was this character in the text that was talking about, oh, look at all the things that are around today, and the youth are corrupted, and this thing is bad, and look at these temptations and vices in society. Oh, today just seems so terrible, and what about the good old days? And Seneca had this to say, that in any age, in any era, there is going to be some level of degeneracy. There's going to be some sort of societal rot, and this is just going to happen no matter what. There's always going to be some human error in some ways, or people misunderstanding virtue and vice. And this is what's leading people to make some bad decisions. So I think even with or without religion, you're still going to have these issues. And what if we were to have an alternate timeline of like a Catholic theocracy, or the moral majority, we would still have some problems there. So I don't think religion is going to completely fix the problem or do away with it by any means. Maybe if more people were interested in Stoic philosophy, maybe it would be a better society. I don't know, but there's still going to be some faltering along the way, no matter what kind of religious belief or lack of religious belief they have. But I think the thing is that it's important to have some sort of strong moral framework and have some sort of purpose and meaning in society, in life. And if you don't have that, then you could spiral into a really, really bad position. We were talking before the show about some people who go on shooting sprees. They've decided life is no longer worth living, so they're going to take out all their anger on everyone else. And that's certainly not the way to go. But I don't think that just because we lack belief in God, that there's no meaning or purpose that we could find in life, that there can be some kind of vocation or helping others. There can be some sort of personal development. There can be all routes that people can go down and find meaning and purpose without wokeism and even in opposition to it in many cases.
Yeah, first of all, as a classicist, I'm so glad to hear Seneca mentioned in our podcast. And also that I have tried to tell people many times that classical philosophy is a large part of why I have maintained my Christian faith when confronted with lots of deep questions. And it's also sharpened the way I think about the Christian faith. The fact that there were philosophers long before Jesus who were advocates of monotheism and so on, and of course Aristotle and the whole idea of how you can have morality with certain sort of philosophical views. It's not as though a life has no morality. Anyway, Drew, you want to ask another question?
Well, I was just going to agree that I do think that, I don't think, to Nietzsche's point, I guess, that people behave because of the fear of God. I think, they do it because, their understanding of the social contract is that is because they're selfishly wanting a good society that they want to live in, and they want to be liked, and that can lead down some roads where you feel compelled to do what's socially acceptable, which kind of brings this full circle. So I guess
Well, I certainly do things out of a fear of God. I'm someone who does.
Yeah, it's an interesting question though. So if there were some Christian listeners out there who would say like, well, if it weren't for God, then what's the point? What's stopping you from killing people? What's stopping you from doing all these things? And I would pose it to the Christian and say, well, hey, if you suddenly looked into the arguments and came to this revelation that, hey, I was wrong about this, like, would you go out and murder people the next day? Like, I just don't think that that's the case for
I'm
like
curious.
99.9% of people, right? So there's something more to it than the God belief that's going to lead to virtuous action.
I'm curious, Bill, what you would do differently if you lost your belief in God somehow.
Well, I mean, there's two beliefs. One is in Christianity and one is in God. I don't ever expect that I'll lose either belief, but I can envision that someone might lose their belief in Christianity and still believe in God, because I think the arguments for God, there are natural arguments for God. I don't think there's just a natural argument for Christianity, just on the face of it. If you look at Aquinas's arguments for God and so on, I think. So just to say that first. Secondly, I totally agree with Justin. Like I think people are moral creatures. Human beings are moral creatures. We are going to act and live morally. We seek meaning. We seek purpose. We look for rational order. We look for the truth. I mean, people are going to do that regardless of whether they believe in God or not, because that's what it means to be a human being. So I think Christians are very lazy when they think that by not believing in God, somehow that means you're just going to go out and kill people or whatever. Like, I think that's very shallow thinking. And I think the philosophers long since dispelled us of why that is. And I don't think the Bible ever even remotely suggests it, by the way. The question is whether there's a kind of broad rational foundation for it's whether what people actually do is just out of intuition and nature and instinct and things like that. But is there a rational foundation for it? That's the kind of thing I think that Nietzsche was why he wrote the Parable of the Madman. And we don't want to go into all that. I was trying to explain. I was trying to just get your feedback And
Yeah.
hopefully I've clarified a little bit of my perspective as well.
But you said there are some things you do out of the fear of God.
Yeah, well, I just mean that when, like, by my choosing to do moral actions, it's not only because I think they have an inherent good, in the world. It's also, in addition to that, I also genuinely fear God, who I think made us and is the owner of the universe. And therefore, I just, like when I'm on someone else's property, I feel like I should honor who's ever the property owner. And that's all I meant by that. But you can have both motivations. I do anyway.
Oh, interesting. I don't really feel like anything would change personally, but I've been on both sides, and that's how I see it.
Both sides of
But
the divide, yes.
Well,
I'm
Drew,
not saying I got
as
either
Drew
side
knows,
right.
as Drew knows, I also have been on both sides. I
That's
was
true.
an atheist before I became a Christian.
That's true.
Justin,
But as
is there
far
any
as I
kind
know,
of
you didn't pull a Raskolnikov before you turned Christian.
So, Justin, is there any kind of issue where you feel like you've sort of hinted at this, but where you feel like maybe you've changed a little bit over the last 10 to 15 years on some issues? Is that correct?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think criticism of feminism was one of the first things, and that I bought into all this stuff like the gender wage gap, the 1 in 3, 1 in 4 statistics, and this idea of patriarchy a while back. Never really questioned it until I saw some of the bad actions of writers online. I think the first thing that I really saw was a friend of mine who wrote for an online publication at the time. He had a reader poll where we picked the atheist of the year, and the readers voted on who they thought was this atheist of the year for this fun poll. And the 5 top choices, I think it was at the time, were all men. And there was a writer who was complaining about this, said this is evidence of misogyny in the atheist community. And I said, well, wait a second. And I was sympathetic to this writer. I said, well, wait, his readers voted on this. Like, this was just a poll. This was selected. So how is this sexist thing? And all it was attacks on me and attacks on him. And I looked into a lot of these things even deeper. And at the time, there was also this controversy about a particular woman who allegedly was drinking after hours at an atheist conference and allegedly went into an elevator and was allegedly propositioned, and made a YouTube video after the fact saying that, guys, hey, don't do that. And this was not just about, hey, don't hit on women in an elevator after drinking at a bar, but it transformed into women policing men's behaviors at events. And nothing came of this event. She never said that she was assaulted in any way, or the guy followed her back, or whatever, stayed in the elevator, but just left and went on. And this transformed into a thing where anyone who questioned it, this was being dismissive of women. And the women who questioned it were called gender traitors, sister punishers. It was internalized misogyny. It was even at a conference where a particular writer was speaking, and someone in the crowd had questioned it. And that this went on. She then put this into another speech and spoke about this particular student at the time, and talked about this internalized misogyny. So this was really nasty at the time. That it's any criticism of the ideas is you're just labeled as this nasty person. And it just went on and on and on. Different individuals just being attacked time and time again, to a point where the philosopher Russell Blackford coined a term, witch of the week, that these people were just picking fights, that every week it was just a new target of, this is evidence of what's wrong in the atheist community. And some bloggers even being so dramatic as, I can't even walk down the sidewalk, and people are just harassing me all the time. And one particular person talked about how she had post-traumatic stress disorder as a result of people responding to her on Twitter. And military veterans were not happy about this. And she went on and was talking about how hers is just like the veterans, and this became just a national thing. It's just like over the top reaction to some criticism online. And indeed, there are online trolls. There were people at the time who were just being nasty. And I think this just happens to everyone. Like, you name any given celebrity, like Will Smith, he recently had this video with his wife, and like there was this in and out divorce and some cheating that was going on. And like, I imagine that if Will Smith opens his Twitter account any day, there's going to be some kind of nastiness. There are going to be people calling him names, whatever. It's just par for the course on the internet. It's just a nasty environment. So if you don't like the trolls, the rules usually don't feed the trolls. Just block people on Twitter. I mean, I've done it. I know friends who have done it. But some of these women at the time in particular, and the approved male chorus, as Paula Kirby called it. They've just, I think, profited off of documenting all this nastiness online. They would just revel in it. It's like, here's all these screenshots of people saying this and that, and oh, so and so did this and that, and it's this constant threat narrative. And what do you need to do? Well, you need to do all these extra things, and organizations need to speak out against the harassment directed at women. And one particular person from the male chorus said that if someone puts out an objection, or someone says that they're feeling a certain way, that it doesn't matter whether it's true or false. We need to really just go with what they're saying. And stuff like this really undermined what the atheist community, I think, was supposed to be. Is we're talking about ourselves as a rationalist movement. It's about science, it's about reason and argument and evidence. But if it's just going to be feelings over fact, then that's certainly not going to be the way going forward.
Does this extend for you a little bit into areas of like sex identity or gender identity as well? Or not that you need to comment at length about it, but because it's been, it's frequently divorced from biology, right? So do you sort of see that in the same kind of vein as that, or is that different? Because I would see that as very similar. Yeah.
Can you ask the question in a different way?
Meaning like people who identify as a female, but they're actually biologically a male.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I sort of see that as problematic for them rather than something I need to affirm. And that's controversial, of course. So I'm wondering what you, and I'm not claiming exactly how I would deal with somebody. I have taught students who were male that identified as a female and so on, and I've never like done anything rude to them or anything. I'm just saying I wouldn't feel like I would bow to pressure to sort of affirm or celebrate somebody who took a sex identity that wasn't their birth one.
Yeah, on like a person to person level, like if someone is identifying in a certain way, they want me to use a certain name, or they have a certain name displayed, like I'm not going to go up to someone who maybe doesn't pass for being male or female in a way and just like call them a different pronoun or a different name, or be nasty at anyone in a way like that. But I think the concern is on the legal front, in the law, in that, okay, well, what is being taught in schools? Are we going to have certain laws that are going to penalize people for using incorrect pronouns, even if it's just an accidental thing? This was something that Jordan Peterson was speaking out against years ago, the Canadian Bill C-16 that was trying to legislate this kind of stuff, that you must use certain language to describe people. And it doesn't only go from the he, she, they, them, their, but also named like ZIR and many other pronouns that are just quite recent in language. And you're seeing in some elementary schools, even we see this on Drag Queen Story Hour. We see the genderbread person, the gender unicorn, and their children in kindergarten that are being taught this stuff. And it's really like, okay, I understand that there are some people who don't identify with a certain gender, or societal expectations, or adults who want to change their appearance, this and that. But should that go as far as to schools? And are we going to say, on one extreme, that we're going to give people some puberty blockers, that this has to be part of law and this is covered by insurance and the taxpayers are going to have to pay for it? Is it going to end up like that? I hope not. I hope that it's not going to go down that kind of slippery slope, although it's seeming to go in that direction. So it is something troubling, I see.
So you all must know that your organization is definitely going to be lumped in to the big bucket.
We've already been lumped in as all the deplorables, the undesirables, and personally, I was attacked by many within the atheist movement for years, and I only recently got back in it with Atheists for Liberty. When I heard about the organization coming out, I said, like, hey, you know what, this seems like a group that I can go with. That here's someone who actually is not going to be to this far left progressive type politic, and understands what's going on in the social justice front.
So Drew, the Protestant Reformation of atheism has happened.
Yeah,
now Drew's going to have
signs
to decide.
And nails going up.
Drew's going to have to decide whether he agrees with the 95 Theses, which group he's going to be in.
Well, as usual, probably, since I'm on this podcast, I have the inclination, the sort of I'm hardwired to want to find the compromise and to want to find the golden mean between these two ways, because there are things that Justin says that I very much identify with. You know, the idea that there are things about the woke side of the world that are being weaponized, that are, you know, attack first, ask questions later, and you know, I see that as a problem. On the other side, I see that they do have some good points, and that there are some social, you know, progress things that we could all do a better job with, you know. And so I try to toe that line without taking a side. I do feel like we need to.
That's what the reformers said, Drew. It didn't
Well,
work out so well for them.
you know, it's funny because I feel like part of the problem is not the beliefs, but the way they're being used, the way
Yeah.
they're being treated. They're
that's
weaponized.
Yeah, that's interesting because we hear like, okay, define feminism. Oh, it's a movement that men and women are equal or should have equal rights, and you know, everybody's going to be for that. But then, how do they go about that? What are their ideas? How are they going to bring about the change in society? So it's not so much as like how these people define, because you get this like, oh, unicorn and rainbow social justice. It sounds so great, but yes,
Yeah.
how are you going to go about it? What are your methods? How are you going to treat others?
But you know, we had this conversation with a recent guest. You know, the only way to really have a decent conversation about this is one, you have to have time to do so. You have to actually take the time, and you have to have enough trust in your interlocutor to get to know them. Like, a lot of people that might be listening might have written you off when you said that you didn't, when you said something negative about the gender pay gap, which, you know, based on what you just said, you don't think women should get paid less for doing the same work.
Right.
So this is the thing. It's like, you know, people aren't taking the time for these nuances on either side, you know. And not saying you specifically on your side, but I'm saying I've been on sort of both sides for a moment, you know. I've thought about it from either way, and I've thought, you know, there are things that I'm tempted to throw out whenever I look at it one way or the other, as, okay, you're not woke, you're not listening, you're not trying, or you're just here to attack me, you know. And so if we could get past those things that are just destroying the discourse, I think we'd be better off.
I think Justin's position, if I understand you, Justin, is that there's something potentially a little worse than Christianity right now, which is wokeism.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, I wonder if we were to bring Hitchens back, like what he would think about all this stuff, and like where his focus would be as well. But many commentators today from, you know, previously popular so-called atheist YouTube channels, right? A lot of those have gone to speak out against wokeness, and that's been their primary focus. And I really can't blame them for that, as that seems to be much a bigger threat.
Yeah. Well, Justin, it's been great talking to you. Definitely a unique interview from our experience with a lot of the other atheist organizations and so on, and really enjoyed talking to you. Wish we could talk a little longer, but thanks again for being here. I'm Bill the Christian.
And I'm Drew the Skeptic. Thanks for listening.
And that's atheistsforliberty.org. We'd be happy to have people donate. We have membership starting at just $10 a year. So anyone who'd like to be a member, you get access to our Facebook page, Discord server, members only events, and we'd be happy to have you.
All right. Thanks, Justin.
The Divide is produced by Alan and Ben Hawbrooks and edited by John Workman. Dalton Reed handles IT. Join us for further discussion on this topic at our subreddit, TheDividebyiPUB. To learn more about other episodes and who we are, check out ipub.org/thedivide. See you next time on The Divide.